Morning, everyone. I think we're in an election campaign. I've said this before. Everything but the campaign writ has been dropped. I think Trudeau is actively campaigning. And, well, I'm not the only one who thinks that. Here we go. Here's the HuffPost. HuffPost. I think that's a ridiculous name for a newspaper, by the way. I know her name was Arianna Huffington, or is Arianna Huffington. I still think this is a ridiculous name for a newspaper. Okay, back to this. Trudeau says Canadians can judge his ethics record during campaigns. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau brushed off a question about his ethical compass Wednesday, saying Canadians will have an opportunity to draw conclusions on his record in election campaigns. Trudeau made the comment during an interview on CBC Radio, the early edition, after host Stephen Quinn asked if it's fair for Canadians to wonder about the Prime Minister's sense of right and wrong, particularly in light of the We Charities controversy and multiple Conflict of Interest Act violations. The Prime Minister chalked up that kind of flack to partisan politics. Yeah, we're so partisan. Oh man, all we want is somebody who doesn't lie blatantly to, committees and other people. Unfortunately, we can't get that from the Liberals. Or, somebody who answers a question. We'd love to have somebody who answers a question. Instead, you get blaming right-wingers. Okay, back to this. Quote, I think that it's certainly something a lot of people are talking about in opposition, Trudeau said, and Canadians will make their determinations in election campaigns. I scroll down a little bit. Trudeau struck a campaign tone in his interview, blaming the right for political pushback on the topic of safe injection sites. Yet, and I'll note here just really quickly in Guelph, safe injection sites. In 2019, we had 7 deaths. In 2020, we've had so far 14 deaths. Safe injection sites in Guelph have doubled the deaths. Okay, is that a statistic that you want? Wonderful success. Oh, you weren't going to double the deaths? That wasn't the goal? Oh, that's a failure? Oh, interesting. Unless that wasn't, right? Like, isn't that interesting? That you've doubled the deaths and you're still looking for more funding. It's very ridiculous. Back to this. Right-wingers. How can that be a right-wing? How can that be a right-wing thing to people who say, oh, we want to follow the science? Garbage. Okay. Yet he chose not to support a recommendation, back to this, by several chief public health officials to decriminalize illicit drugs, calling the proposal not a silver bullet to address the province's ongoing opioid overdose crisis. He said a comprehensive healthcare approach was needed. Let's decriminalize all. You know what's happening? Drugs are killing more people than COVID-19. So what we should do is make drugs legal. Does that make any sense to you? And make it illegal to not get the COVID-19 vaccine because, your body might fight that off. But if it does, you could be addicted to this opiate and die in the next couple of years anyway. So silly. Like, seriously, it's a really interesting thing to watch. People saying on one side of things, we're very concerned about stigma around drug use. And on the other side, we're very concerned about the life of the person. Come on. You can't choose both. Back to this. He also lambasted conservatives for being critical about emergency COVID-19 spending. The Prime Minister repeated points he had previously made to justify the decision to prorogue Parliament last month, explaining that the pandemic has forced the government to update its priorities. A new throne speech is expected to be delivered September 23rd, followed shortly by a confidence vote that if the Liberal minority government loses, would trigger a fall election. Okay, so fundamentally here, the news, and this is HuffPost again, is allowing Trudeau to get away with proroguing Parliament. The only reason he prorogued was to kill the committees investigating We. He was to get that out of the news because the pitchforks were coming out. The torches were being lit. People were getting very upset about the $1 billion he gave to his friend. And Rachel Wernick, the public service, making that decision. Rachel Wernick, sister to the former Privy Clerk, Michael Wernick, right? Privy Clerk chair. And that's notable. Nobody's talking about that, but it's notable. And now that we find out that actually Bardish Chagger is the real person, she's the one who's going to lose her job. I wonder if also Rachel Wernick will have to take any flack from this, or if she will get to retain her bureaucratic post and serve the next Minister of Youth and whatever Minister Chagger is the minister of. Fundamentally, the people who made these recommendations are still in place. The back channels that they used to discuss this and honestly say, nobody from the PMO talked to anybody in there. But, Rachel Wernick maybe talked to Michael Wernick, who maybe talked to Butts, who maybe mentioned it to Telford. Who knows? Broken telephone, right? Who knows? I don't know what happened, but maybe, because they all know each other. Privately, they're all friends. They're all on each other's text thing, and I'm sure they have friendly Zoom meetings, Tuesday night trivia or whatever, as you do with co-workers and colleagues. But, I think that it's interesting that the newspaper is letting them get away with just framing it as, oh yeah, we just needed to push a reset. You didn't give a budget. You didn't do anything in this sitting of Parliament. Moving on to the Conservative leader. He's named his new deputy leader. And my computer is freezing. Hold on a second here. Moving on. Sorry, the computer's freezing, so I hope I get through the rest of the show. The Conservatives have named a new deputy leader, and that's Candice Bergen, and she is the new deputy leader. I like that better than Miss Alisev, who is a former Liberal. I mean, you couldn't get more LibCon than that. They need to be setting up their party for an election because, Trudeau's already campaigning, so you've got to get your ducks in a row. This is a distraction. I've talked about the Globe and Mail, the Governor General, and the Globe and Mail is reporting Trudeau calls Payette an excellent Governor General and says he has no plans to replace her. So I think all of this stuff is just a distraction from setting up the campaign, setting things up to be moving on those fronts, and all of the Governor General talk is just news it's just a distractionary news piece, right? Like, I don't think that I think there's a lot of smoke and no fire there. I don't think that anything meaningful is going to happen before an election's called or before Trudeau loses power. And who's in charge of that? The NDP. The NDP, I think at this point, hold the cards there. And if not the NDP, then the Bloc, right? Like, if the NDP supports them, the Liberals, then they don't need to woo the Bloc. If the NDP don't support them, then they try to get the Bloc on board, right? That's the game, and they're playing for power, right? Here's Canada's top doctor, and she says, wear a mask while having sex. This is Reuters. I'm not going to read this. This is if you are willing to have sex with somebody and putting a mask on, have you seen Doc Martin? Spoiler alerts. It's not a good idea to insult the person that are making romantic overtures towards you, right? Regardless of what the Canada's top doctor says, it's a bad idea to, oh yes, let's get closer together. I'll get the glory hole set up, everyone. Hold on. Let me put my mask on. It's just silly, right? It's propaganda. It's silly. It can't be taken seriously. How are these people expecting to be continually taken seriously? It is... No, I can't take this seriously. It's garbage. Okay, here is CTV News spreading propaganda. It says... This is posted September 2nd. Today's September 3rd. People with sociopathic traits less likely to follow coronavirus guidelines, study finds. This just made me howl. Okay, here it is. A new study has found that people with sociopathic traits are less likely to follow public health measures designed to help limit the spread of COVID-19, including wearing a face mask and adhering to physical distancing. The study, conducted by researchers at the university this is in Brazil. I'm not going to try and say all that. Found that people with sociopathic traits were also more likely to trivialize the risk posed by the novel coronavirus and avoid regular hand washing. Yeah, I never wash my hands. It's been 10 years since I washed my hands. Excuse me. Quote, our findings indicate that antisocial traits, especially lower levels of empathy and higher levels of callousness, deceitfulness, and risk-taking, are directly associated with lower compliance with containment measures, the study read. I just, again, in Guelph, we've got this be kind to exemptions, or be tolerant of exemptions. And I think it's really funny how the newspaper is using anything that it can get its hands on. Oh, did you see this study out of Brazil? They're saying that it's sociopathic people who don't want to do this, putting masks on and things. And also they don't wash their hands. Have you seen men who walk up to the urinals and they pee and then they just walk straight out of the door and they don't wash their hands? That's these people. No, it's just propaganda. It's the same as telling you to wear a mask while you're having sex with somebody. If you're having sex with somebody, if they're sick, you're kind of concerned about that. I would imagine, right? I hope so. And concerned maybe we'll skip tonight. Maybe you have some soup, Watch Gilmore Girls, feel better, try again tomorrow when you're feeling better, right? I don't know. I think that wearing a mask during sex is, again, silly. Okay, moving into the coronavirus Alert app. Alert app. Yes. Did you download it? No, me either. Okay. The federal government's COVID-19 exposure alert app has been downloaded more than 2 million times, but only about 100 people have reported infections. And Ontario has, 15 million people? 15 million person population, I think. And that could be wrong. That's what I think it is. Even so, 15 million people and only having 2 million people download the app. And I don't know if that's just in Ontario or what, but that's not enough. And this CTV article makes that point. And again, CTV, take it with a grain of salt, right? Infowars.com, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, low uptake and disclosure numbers plague Fed's COVID alert app. Originally presented as a promising tool to fight the coronavirus pandemic, new numbers suggest the response to the federal government's COVID-19 alert app has been underwhelming. Only Ontario so far has embraced the software, which allows users to disclose a positive coronavirus test and alerts anyone who has come close to that person via Bluetooth tracking. The app's success hinges on widespread use, but only about 2.2 million downloaded the COVID alert in its first month, according to Health Canada data provided to CTV News. It's still a large number, but even if all those downloads were in Ontario, that would account for only 15% of the province's population. The percentage actually using the app in Ontario is likely even smaller. Experts suggest that a 60% adoption rate is needed to make apps like COVID Alert truly effective in stopping the spread of the virus. Perhaps a more critical figure at this stage is how many disclosures and exposure alerts the app has facilitated. That number too is strikingly low. Though Ontario recorded more than 3,000 new cases of the novel coronavirus in August, only about 100 people reported a positive diagnosis on the app since its launch at the end of July. So few people downloaded it compared to the population. And of the people who downloaded it, even fewer used it, right? Of 3,000 new cases, only 100 people reported. That's not great. That's not great. That's tax dollars wasted because nobody's going to use it. And it's not like people are going to be like, oh yeah, let's use it now, unless they mandate it like the masks, if that makes sense, which it doesn't. Here's Dr. Kaur, and I think that's how you say that. And she's been speaking out along with some other doctors. There are videos of countless doctors, 1,000 doctors out of Germany recently. There are other doctors who have been scrubbed from the internet. Dr. Kaur has got ire of her own for talking about hydroxychloroquine and other controversial topics. And so I follow her because, hey, that's what I do. Not necessarily following controversial topics, but following what is truthful, I think, and what people are talking about in a truthful way. And I think that she's being truthful and genuine as far as I can tell. So, and who knows? Make up your own mind, though, right? That's what I think. I hope you come to your own conclusion. Okay, back to this. Dr. Kaur says, over the past few weeks, I've been blind copied on several emails from lifelong Liberals to our Prime Minister Trudeau, angry regarding his relentless continued destruction of our economy and healthcare and the marginalization and outright censorship of any who voice an opposing perspective, all echo the same frustration and anger with the government's shift in narrative and its illogical, harmful response. Each email to our Prime Minister concludes with a similar theme. This is my red line in the stand. Liberals support no more. That includes federal, provincial, or municipal. I think that's interesting, and I'll be interested to see if that plays out in the next election. As I said, I think we're in the election cycle. I think it's happening right now. Here is National Post, and they're reporting Shopify to vacate its Ottawa offices, headquarters in virtual office push. That's an interesting turn, and people were talking about this before. What will that do to real estate prices? I mean, if it crashes them, get in, because they're going to go back up at some point. But this is interesting. An interesting move from Shopify. Shopify is one of the biggest companies in Canada who uses Canada for headquarters. So removing its Ottawa headquarters, I'm assuming they're not removing their Ottawa headquarters like that's the location of Shopify, but assuming that they're not spending a lot of money on huge office buildings and stuff anymore, that's going to have an impact on commercial office space. I mean, who knows? What are they going to do? Retrofit it for watch the next story here. Here, Laurie Goldstein says, been thinking about this for a while now. What is going on at the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation? Why is the head of Canada's housing agency so opposed to home ownership? So you're going to have all these empty office buildings downtown in prime locations, right? What could they possibly do with it? Here we go. The Star, why is the head of Canada's housing agency so opposed to home ownership? You might have heard the latest Swedish linguistic experts flygascam or flight shame. Okay, it's a word directed at people who fly and is intended to make them feel bad about their travel choice due to its environmental implications. With this in mind, allow me to make a reckless prediction about the next crusading phrase, meant to make people feel guilty about acting in their own best interest. And this is meant to shame you about having a single family home, but I'm not going to try and say what he's written there. This is my attempt at a Swedish word for single family home ownership shame. I used the Google Translate, apologies, blah, blah, blah. It may not have reached common usage, but keep an eye on your dictionaries. Last month, Evan Siddall, president of the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, gave a speech to a Toronto housing conference that might be considered an early warning sign of an approaching that word. Before we get to what he said, let's remind ourselves that CMHC is a federal crown corporation that helps Canadians buy homes through mortgages, insurance, and securitization of mortgage bonds. It also operates as a sort of adjunct federal Department of Housing. So what does Siddall think of home ownership? He seems to think it's a very bad idea. Quote, our dream of home ownership is static and regressive, he told his audience. We need to call out the glorification of home ownership for the regressive canard that it is. The often combative Siddall expressed his desire to dismantle the dream of home ownership and in particular put an end to Canadians' aspirations of owning single-family homes, which he calls the wrong sort of residential construction. Rather than build 10 single-family homes on any particular plot of land, he said municipalities should favor 100 or 200 multi-unit developments of rentals. Given the significance of home ownership among Canadians, 67.8% of Canadian households currently own a home. Siddall admits he has his work cut out for him. The dream of a single-family home in the suburbs still burns strong for many, he said, blaming this on a, quote, real estate industry drunk on its excess. I scroll down. From Siddall's perspective, everyone should live in massively dense rental apartment complexes because that way we can cheaply fit more people into less space. Stalinist Russia just popped into my head for some reason. Single-family homes are thus the selfish option because they prevent other denser options from occurring. Feeling shame yet? With his provocative stance, Siddall has put himself rather far offside his federal bosses in his job, for example, to implement the Trudeau government's new first-time homebuyers incentive program that has as its explicit goal of helping young families buy houses. In fact, every major party in the last federal election had at least one platform item dedicated to making home buying easier. Here's where I think I disagree a little bit with the author. The Liberal government has said that the continuum of home ownership or the continuum of home occupation or something to that effect. And it's a very, like during the last campaign, my opponent, the Liberal opponent, was talking about the continuum of that home ownership, or there's a specific buzzword he used. And I said, what does that mean? Like, do you own anything you're talking about? Or is that just some fancy newspeak? Like, what are you talking about? Can you define it better? And of course they couldn't, because they don't do that, right? They just come up with the fancy newspeak. But I think behind closed doors, they have this idea of what they're doing. And I think this falls in line with it. I think the Shopify emptying out the big cavernous spaces. Well, what can we do with that? Well, we can retrofit it, right? And then use all of that climate change money to retrofit these buildings to make them habitable and hubs for multiple families, 200, 300 unit multiple family office buildings. Right? No longer with Shopify, but Liberal L. Something to that effect. I don't know. But it seems to all fit. Or not. I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But it seems strange for a crown corporation whose main job is to help Canadians buy houses to have an opinion like that on home ownership. It seems to be not what most Canadians want or expect their government to be engineering, right? Like if the government is incentivizing things, you get more of those things, right? So if they're incentivizing municipalities to build, instead of 10 family homes, 200 multi-unit rentals, well, that's going to happen. And if you look around Guelph, if you look around your hometown now, the houses that are being built aren't single-family homes that are accessible. When I was a kid, you could buy a 3-bedroom, 1,200 square foot house with a yard and a driveway and sometimes a garage. We didn't have a garage, but you could buy a garage. And it was like $60,000. And somebody who was working a single job could buy that house and like carry that house. And now you've got mega mansions or multi-unit attached dwellings. And this is problematic because they're fundamentally changing the way people live. And I don't know if it's with consent or not. I don't think people are consenting to this. I think it's being top down. I don't know about top down, but mayors have conferences with the United Nations, and the United Nations have sustainability goals. Mayors talk about sustainability goals. There are other people who go really deep into the UN sustainable agenda, the sustainability goals, how certain municipalities, Guelph is one of them, has very tight ties to the UN and have made agreements that they're going to be in line with these sustainability goals. And that has led to the recent changes to the construction, right? And it's packaged up very well. It's packaged up as better for us, more healthy, sustainable, right? All of these buzzwords are meant to get you on side to say that you agree with these things that are happening, because otherwise they couldn't do it, right? But I think the reality of it is very different. I think the reality of it is getting people like this guy in to shame people for home ownership so they can, well, when they run out of space here, retrofit or I don't know. I don't know what the end game is ultimately. But I think that their timeline is a lot longer than me. And I think that that's by design. But who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Governments don't... Well, I'll leave you with this. Mulrooney made a speech talking about passing the torch for the last 30 years of government and each accepting the torch and pushing those policies together. And if that's true, then that's problematic because people elect governments in 4-year increments. If we're not actually electing a government who's going to do anything different than the last guys, then it's the facade of democracy, right? It's not real democracy. It's not real choices. It's do you want this puppet or this puppet to implement the same policies at this speed or this speed, right? Like it's maybe a different speed, but it's fundamentally the same policies. And well, I mean, like I said, is that democracy? Is the facade of democracy all we're allowed, right? Is the UN so powerful that it's just sidestepped the federal government and gone into municipalities to get its agenda in place? And it looks like yes. It looks like that's exactly what's happened. So that's transforming Canada from even the 1980s to now. And again, I don't know that that's with consent, but they're saying it's with consent, and they're packaging it up in a way that is consumable and shareable. And if you dare to step outside of what the approved narrative is, well, right, you just get done to you what gets done to the doctors who dare to speak out about the approved narrative in their profession, right? And so that's notable. That's something to think about. That's enough for me today. That's longer than I thought. I thought we were going to have a short show. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.